I know this story may sound fictional. A lot of people don't believe me when I tell it, but I can assure you that the other person involved also witnessed what occurred this night. It happened 11 years ago with an ex-girlfriend. It actually changed our relationship for the worse, and we ended up breaking up a few weeks after. Nonetheless, I still remember this like it was yesterday, due to how unexplainable it was. My girlfriend at the time wanted to surprise me with what she said was an overnight surprise trip. I obliged and felt like I was a pretty lucky guy for her to do something that required that much planning. After packing a duffel bag full of clothes and toiletries, we left for what I thought was a resort or some kind of hotel stay. 2.5 hours passed when we pulled off the main road and headed down an off-road path. I asked her if this was a camping trip, and she replied, yes. To be honest, I was disappointed as I didn't really like camping. Not to mention, I wish I knew to pack my hiking shoes. I didn't complain, of course, because it was still a romantic gesture. 15 minutes on this rough road, we finally pulled into a camping ground. The first thing I noticed was that there really wasn't anyone around us. It made sense though, this was really far off the beaten path. I was actually surprised her car made it that far, considering how harsh the road was. Anyway, we make a fire pit and she cooks dinner. Everything is going just fine and we are really feeling each other. We of course take it to the tent as the sun goes down and we are vibing off each other. Yeah, it's what you would expect things would happen, as young college kids do. This is when the first strange occurrence happens. I hear scratching noises on the side of the tent. I try to remember if we set the tent up next to a brush. Maybe the wind is causing branches to rustle against the tent. Oh well, that's the woods. Maybe it's a bird or something else. It stops rustling, as we continue chilling, as if nothing happened. Then things escalate in a strange manner. It's like the wind stopped and the environment became silent. We both felt uneasy, causing us to get sort of knocked off out of our playful mood. She laid next to me as we tried to concentrate on listening to hear if there was a bear or some other animal in the area. Then it happened in an instant. Something akin to an explosion hit the tent tremendously hard. I could compare it to, say, if a log was thrown like a battering ram against the side of the tent. I say this because it literally pushed the material in forcefully and it felt dangerous. A surge of adrenaline lit through my body as I felt like something violent was outside the tent. I never knew if I was a fight or flight guy, but I guess my next action gives me some idea. I yell aloud, "Give me the knife and get the flashlight," as I scramble up and unzip the tent with the tools in my hand. My first thought was that I was going to confront some psycho that was messing with us, perhaps with a baseball bat or some kind of battering weapon. I kid you not, I launched myself out of that tent and stood up in a flurry to confront my attacker. A few breaths pass as a cold feeling sets in. I do a 360 scan to nothing but silence and darkness. Maybe it was a branch that fell on the tent. Nope. There was absolutely nothing on the ground where the thud was heard. "Hello?" I yelled again and again, to no response, until only a moment later in the silence, a chill shot up my spine. "Get the keys and get out of the tent," I said in a frantic tone as my girlfriend listened and now joined me. I looked at a car that we arrived in and noticed it was about 30 yards out by the shoddy off-road path. She didn't even need to know what I was thinking as we both just started to speed walk towards it. You might be thinking at this point that I'm overreacting, but truly I cannot describe the terror that washed over me when I looked out in the darkness after investigating the tent. I could feel like something was watching me, and to top it off, it was eerily silent. I know she confirmed my suspicions when she started for the car immediately, without question. Our instincts were telling us to get the hell out of there. The walk to the car was unnerving and felt like a football field away. But finally, we got into the car with keys in hand. I took the driver's seat. After turning the keys, led to some relief as the engine started. Instinctively, I locked the doors and turned the headlights on. We sat for about 3 seconds trying to rationalize what was happening when my girlfriend started exclaiming, "My laptop is moving, something is in the tent." She said this because she brought her laptop to serve as a lantern after dark. We of course left it in a hurry, as well as other items. I saw what she saw. It was items being rustled around 30 yards away. Without further hesitation, I put the car in gear and started down the rough road. As I tried to calmly drive the car down the dirt path quickly, but carefully. Now it was a very rough road, and I did not want to get stranded out there. The strangest thing happened next. A loud, piercing ringing noise rang from inside the car's cabin. I turned the radio on and off. I checked the windows. I asked my girlfriend if her car had ever made such noises. She said no. I asked her again if she could hear it. Maybe it was just me being under stress. And she said, yes, I hear it, and that she didn't know what it was. She sounded confused and panicked. Now, I want to write this off as a car problem, but if you were in there with me, you would describe it as some kind of bell continuously ringing. It didn't sound like any car noise I'd ever heard. My next instinct as I grew up as a pastor's kid, I just remember praying for 10 minutes as I was convinced it was supernatural or demonic. We endured the screech for 10 grueling minutes. As to my relief, it ended suddenly. It didn't fade out or go quiet. The loud ring literally stopped in an instant. I can't describe the feeling in that car when it stopped. It is so strange to look back and remember that I felt internally that the ordeal was over once the ring stopped. Everything felt normal again. The panic, the chills, all of it went away in an instant. We ended up down the road another 45 minutes and finally stopped at a trucker diner. We slept in the parking lot, or at least she did. I was just still on edge. In an attempt at bravery the next day, we went back to the camping site as the sun was up. We investigated, but saw no tracks or anything except for the contents of the tent had been tossed around, but still accounted for. I was hoping they were missing so I could write it off as people screwing with us and plundering our tent, but that didn't seem to be the case. We were packed up and gone in less than 10 minutes as the area still felt weird. I haven't been camping since. I would go again, but next time I want an RV, or at least a relatively known location with others around. This place was in the remote mountains of Payson, Arizona, far from civilization. I live in Northern Europe. My country is cold and covered by a large forest and several lakes. My family consists of my mother, father, and an older brother, who is 3 years older than me. Now he's really important to the story. And now it's also important to know that my parents' house is in the middle of nowhere. Just forest all around it. There aren't even proper roads or any streetlights. And the nearest neighbour lives really far away. In my country, winter comes early and lasts longer than summer, so the days are dark almost all year round. My father is a fireman and my mother is a nurse, so they've always been on night shifts. They have left me and my brother home alone since we were quite young. I don't know if it's even legal to leave us alone, but my brother has always been good at taking care of me. This particular evening was close to Christmas. Both of us were on winter break, but my brother still went to ice hockey practice. He was really tired that night after practice. Mother and father had gone to work at night and left us alone. I was 8 at the time and my brother was 11. We often slept next to each other downstairs in our parents' bed, but I decided to be a big girl that night and sleep in my own bed upstairs. I really just wanted to play my Nintendo, and I knew my brother wouldn't let me. My brother was so tired after training, and he just wanted to go to sleep. We ate, brushed our teeth, and went to our rooms upstairs. Now my room faced the forest, and his room faced the only dirt road. There was a hall and a toilet between our rooms. My brother must have fallen asleep right away, but I played and played. Played for so long that I lost track of time. I was under my covers in case my brother came to scold me. Then, I started to hear something outside. However, I didn't pay attention to it at first. I've lived all my life in the middle of the forest. You can hear voices from there all the time. The small voices changed in a second. Someone started shouting, almost screaming. It sounded like a grown man who was wounded. I lifted my head from under the covers, startled, and listened for a moment. I called out my brother's name, but he didn't answer. I got up from my bed and ran to my brother's room. He slept soundly. I started rocking him awake. At the same time, I saw from his alarm clock that it was 2 in the morning. My brother woke up confused. "Do you hear that?" I asked in a whisper. My brother's eyes widened and all sleep vanished from his eyes. He sprang up. He didn't say anything. He walked towards my room. The shouting came from somewhere in the forest. We stood together in my room and stared out into the darkness. "I think someone needs help," I said quietly. My brother's expression didn't change. His face was like stone. No one needs help of 2 kids. Besides, if he needed help, he would be screaming for help. My brother turned around, and he was right. I heard no words, just a screaming. My brother walked downstairs and I ran after him. Our house has 3 doors. He tried each of them to make sure they were locked. He took our father's headlamp because it had the strongest light. Then he picked up the house phone. Now it was 2010, so not all the kids had their own phones. He made sure all the lights were off and took my hand and started to lead us back upstairs. Then he stopped. The shouting had changed. It no longer sounded scared or needy for help. It sounded irritated, almost angry, like it was annoyed that we didn't come out looking for it. My brother squeezed my hand and pulled me upstairs. He stared at my room for a moment before he pulled me into his room with him. He closed the door and sat behind his bed, pulling me into his arms. It was dark everywhere. My brother hadn't turned on the headlamp, but he had 112 ready on the phone, which is our country's emergency number. We sat there in silence. The sound had come closer until it was clearly behind the window of my room. We heard someone banging on my window, and I started to sob. My brother stroked my head to calm me down, but it didn't help. I was so scared. The sound seemed to be coming closer and closer. It had climbed the fire escape under my window and was now travelling along the rain gutters towards my brother's window. Then it became quiet. It stopped screaming, but we could hear it clinging to the rain gutters to get closer to us. Then it was too quiet. My brother turned on the headlamp and pointed the light towards his window. Nothing. He turned off the light and waited a moment. Then he pointed the light at the window again. Nothing. He turned it off. Then there was a big crash, as if a big pile of snow had dripped from the roof down to the terrace. My brother flashed the light in the window. There was something on it. The kind of trace that is left when you breathe too close to the glass in cold weather. There was a trace of mist on it. My brother immediately turned off the light. Whatever it was, it had fallen down because my brother's window has nothing to hold on to. We started hearing moaning. It sounded only partially human. It sounded more like a bear. If you've ever heard the sound a bear makes when it's been shot, that's what it sounded like. But it had a touch of manness to the voice. Then it became angry and it threw a full tantrum. It started hitting the wall of the house. I remember squeezing my eyes shut and pressing my head against my brother's shirt. It raged for a while, but started to whine and moan again, and it no longer sounded human. I can't describe what it was like, but it didn't sound natural. My brother dropped the headlamp on the floor and hugged me tightly. We listened to the sound for quite a long time. I don't remember at what point I fell asleep, but I woke up in the morning. The beautiful sun reflected against the white snow. I was laying on my brother's bed while he was sitting next to me reading comics. He smiled. Had I been dreaming? I didn't have time to say anything when we heard the lock on the front door open. It was 9 o'clock. Dad had come home. My brother cheerfully jumped out of bed and ran to greet Dad downstairs. Maybe I had a nightmare and went to sleep next to my brother. I mean, it didn't sound impossible, especially since my brother didn't mention it in the morning. I convinced myself that I had really had a nightmare that just felt real. I believed for so many years. However, that changed. Now my brother came to visit me yesterday. Nowadays I live in the capital of my country, far from my mother and father, because I go to uni. My brother broke up with his long-term girlfriend, and I promised that he could bunk in my place as long as he needed. We had a lot of fun, just like the old times. We drank some wine and watched a movie, and just talked about everything. Then our conversation started to get a little deeper, which usually happens after drinking wine. I turned to look out my window. Winter was coming, and it was already dark. It brought back childhood memories, and I told him about a dream I'd had when I was little, while looking at the street lamps outside. This darkness reminds me of when I had a nightmare as a child. I dreamed that someone screamed behind my window and I hid in your room with you. Wasn't I a strange girl? I laughed and turned to look at my brother. My brother is now 23. He is huge. He's into bodybuilding and has a blonde beard. He looks a bit like a Viking, and I've never seen a look on him like that as an adult. He looked at me with big eyes. He was pale, like he had seen a ghost. At this point, I felt freaked out and asked him, "What? You remember that?" he asked me. And it got quiet. I asked him what he meant, that I thought it was a dream, and I was so confused. My brother looked really startled, as if I had digged up a memory from his mind that he wanted to forget. I told him to answer me and that I thought it was a nightmare. I then became startled myself. My brother shook his head. "I thought you wouldn't remember that. You were so little. I hoped you'd forget." My brother looked at me blankly and told me his side of the story. He told me how I'd fallen asleep in his arms from exhaustion. He pushed me to his bed, but he didn't fall asleep. He sat by my side all night like a guard dog. The morning had begun to dawn. The sound began to fade until it just disappeared. My brother couldn't sleep, so he decided to start reading comics to pass the time. And in the morning, when our father had come home, my brother had gone out to look for tracks. But since it had snowed all night and morning, all the tracks were covered. For the next week, my brother visited my room several times a night to make sure that I was sleeping safely. We started talking more about what happened. Neither of us ever mentioned what happened to anyone. I asked him why he didn't call 112, but he just shook his head. Who would have believed me? I mean, he was right. It would have sounded like a prank. My brother also said he was annoyed that he didn't flash the lights on my window sooner. He would have wanted to see what the creature looked like. I was just happy that I didn't see anything. I'm also happy to know I'm not crazy and that it wasn't a dream. I have a witness. My brother experienced it too, and he remembers it better than I do. No one else has to believe me, and nobody else would. Of course, it's also possible that somehow we created the whole thing in our heads with no physical evidence of what happened, and it happened years ago. It's very possible that we were just kids with overactive imaginations. I'm certainly not denying that possibility. However, I am interested to know if anyone else has experienced something similar, and if you have, did you see it? I was actually a little nervous before because I saw some kind of animal that I just can't explain. And also, I feel absolutely crazy for even thinking that it may or may not have been a werewolf. I haven't really talked about it much, only to one of my closest friends, who I'm pretty sure thinks I'm making this all up. Now, I'd taken a small trip and rented a cabin in Wisconsin. I'm not going to go into much detail on the location, due to the fact that I own property there as well as my family. Now anyway, this cabin is close by the lake, and there's maybe 1 or 2 other cabins in the area that are close by. Otherwise, it's just all forest and kind of isolated, except for the occasional minimal boat traffic in the distance. So one night, me and a few friends, so there were 4 of us in total, including 2 children, my daughter and my friend's son, we decided we were going to have a bonfire. Now the fire pit is located toward the rear of the cabin, and beyond that is the woods, so we're facing away from the lake. We're waiting for it to get dark, so we collect some firewood and put up stacks and set everything up as normal, like we've done every other time we've been out there. Everyone had gone inside to get blankets and such, and me and my daughter were still outside. My daughter was closer to the deck, sitting on the steps, and I was near the fire pit. I've poured lighter fluid onto the wood and tossed in a match, and the fire slowly began to grow. As I'm looking out past the fire, I notice a fairly tall creature with shaggy, dark fur. So I saw this thing just staring directly at me with yellow, glowing eyes. It had an elongated face, which looked to be very dog-like, and it was making heavy breathing sounds, as if it was almost struggling to inhale. I instantly dropped everything I was holding and ran towards the deck, lifted my daughter up and ran for the door. Once inside, everyone asked what happened and why I was so scared. Just as everyone was trying to comfort me, An eerie howl could be heard from outside, much louder than I've heard ever before, and everyone else heard it too, but they chalked it up to being a wolf or a coyote. I know what I saw was no ordinary wolf, and a bear? That just didn't seem plausible. This thing was tall and thin around the middle. It was hunched over and wheezing. I'm not entirely sure what this was, and yes, we did go back outside moments later to put out the fire. There was no sign of it. I mean, I wouldn't even go looking. Now, I didn't get a chance to see this very clearly because I was like, nope. But it appeared to have long and lanky paws. I don't even know if they were claws though, but I didn't want to stick around and find out.